All right, we come to Proverbs chapter 6 today. You guys endured last week, Proverbs chapter 5, and, second service, you guys, I was telling first service, they were like, yeah, that was great. I go, well, you guys missed second service because second service got like the extended edition, That means it's just the longer version of it is all that means. But Proverbs 5, as we were looking at that last week, was dealing the entire chapter, the counsel of the father to his son on the wisdom of really avoiding at all costs the perils of adultery. As we come into chapter 6, today we're going to be looking at the first 19 verses of chapter 6. The reason being is that there's like 4 different sections in here. But then in verse 20 through the end of chapter 6 and through chapter 7, it kind of goes back to that theme of adultery. And I don't want to say that, too loud because some of you might be, oh, no, not again. And then you won't show up again next week. But as we take a look at today's section, it kind of brings us into a little bit more of the layout of the book of Proverbs in that we have multiple topics that are set before us. And, of course, this is going to become even more so the case when we get into chapter 10 and beyond. Chapter 10 and beyond, you kind of have these Proverbs that are like one verse, boom, and it's just kind of like where's the wisdom? You know what I mean? Like, it's the nugget. That's all that it is. And then it moves on to sometimes a totally separate proverb, piece of wisdom, different topic. Whereas so far we've really been going through larger sections. Chapter 5 is a large section dealing on one topic. As we come to chapter 6, this first part of it, we've got kind of 4 different topics, but we're still looking at multiple verses. So like the first one's going to be 5 verses long, dealing with really one issue. So we're going to look at this as we go through this. And then, we'll move on into the next one after that. And so kind of think that you're going to have multiple topics as you go throughout this. No one would ever plan a sermon this way. But as we're going through the Proverbs, you would have to have a pretty intricate approach to try to consolidate every topic. It would just simply be a topical approach. So we're just going to go verse by verse as we go through this. And so, chapter 6 of Proverbs, verse 1, it says, "My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler." As we take a look at this, wisdom speaks, and as we look at this as thinking of Solomon speaking to his son, and we get to receive this not just as kind of like, oh, cool, we get to look at Solomon's wisdom, but we're literally receiving this as the Holy Spirit speaking to us because we're looking at Scripture, and all Scripture is inspired or God-breathed. And so we get to receive this personally. You can think about this as being like a son of God, and the Lord is speaking to you as we get to receive this wisdom. But this section deals, it's really just one simple basic point, and it's the warning from wisdom's perspective, or the wisdom that warns against becoming surety for someone else. Surety is not a word that we use when we're talking to people. The word there literally means to be a guarantee for someone else. It's typically in the sense of financial dealings. It's when you are stepping up or going to bat for someone else. They are in need of some financial assistance. They might be seeking out a loan, some credit of one means or another. But they can't stand on their own credit. They don't have their own financial means to fulfill a transaction. And so they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, would you guarantee this for me? Meaning that I don't have the credit, but you do. Or I don't have the finances, but you do to back this for me. In the Old Testament, the idea of surety was really backing up a vow or a commitment. Sometimes it was a financial, collateral that would be set forth. Other times, it wasn't necessarily an object of great worth in the material sense, but it could be of great worth in the sense of one's reputation. So just as an example, if you go all the way back to Genesis, and the idea of surety or providing a guarantee for someone else kind of develops throughout history. But in the Old Testament, we would see it simply as it's the idea that you're going to buy something, you don't have all the money, and so you put something down as collateral, meaning I'm going to come back and I'm going to pay for it. usually in that sense, it's something of greater worth, like you say, hey, I don't have the money for this right now, but I do have this gold pocket watch, and it's like it's worth more than what I'm buying from you, so I'm putting this down as collateral, meaning that I'm going to come back and I'm going to pay for this. It could be that I'm putting this down, don't sell this thing, or it could be that you're taking the item with you, leaving your collateral there. There were also transactions where surety had nothing to do with the material value of what you were leaving, but the significance of it. And so it might be that you leave like a staff or a cloak or even a signet ring. Any of these objects might be left as surety or as a guarantee that I'm going to come back and I'm going to make payment for this. But though the cloak might not be worth the same amount or the staff the same amount, it embodied who it belonged to. And so it was the idea of, oh, this is so-and-so's cloak, therefore they've put this as surety, meaning that they've put their reputation on the line. So I've said that, hey, I'm going to come back, I'm going to pay you on Tuesday for this thing. I was thinking about a hamburgers today, but, I'm going to pay you on Tuesday, but I'm going to leave you, okay, this isn't a perfect illustration, okay? But just imagine, I'm going to leave you this ring until I come back. Okay, now the ring is highly symbolic, right? It's my wedding ring. I wouldn't recommend ever taking it off for anything or leaving it as collateral for anything, but just kind of bear in mind that if I didn't complete the transaction and they have my wedding ring, kind of like my reputation is on the line. If I had a cloak or a staff and it was associated, that's mine, and everyone knows, oh, that's Rich's, okay? And yet I didn't come back and complete and make good on my vow or on my purchase, then my reputation, I have left it in their hands. And they're able to say, hey, this person didn't come back, they didn't complete their word, and here's this symbol of their reputation. So it could be that the collateral is literally worth something, materialistically or financially, or it could just be that it's worth their reputation. Either way, it's not something that you want to give up. It's not something that you want to sacrifice for not having followed through on a business transaction. The surety here is putting out surety for someone else, whether it's a friend or a stranger. It's the idea of saying that I'm going to guarantee that this bill is going to get paid, this loan is going to be repaid, that the transaction is going to be completed. And you might not trust them or their ability to do this, but I'm backing this up. I think in modern contexts, for most of us, we would see this happen in the idea of either extending our credit to someone else or in the simple transaction of co-signing on a loan with someone else. They don't have the credit to get the loan on their own, and so they're coming to you saying, hey, would you co-sign on this loan for me? Most common situation is what? Someone's got a young child, not a young child, but I mean a young adult, and they're looking to buy their first car, but they don't have the cash to do it, and so they're going to take out a loan. But, of course, they don't have the credit either. So what are they doing? They're coming to their parents saying, hey, would you co-sign on this loan for me? And, of course, the wise parent goes, no, I'm not going to do that for you. Are you kidding me? Why would I co-sign on your loan? That's really what's at the heart of this wisdom, of this proverb. Okay, so let's take a look at it. My son, if you become surety or a guarantee for your friend, if you have shaken hands, and it's the same context, okay? There used to be a time where we could shake on a deal, right? And it's like if you shook hands, that was like binding, like that was contractual. Did you sign paper? No. Did you shake on it? Yes. Well, that's the deal, like it's done. Like you might as well have signed your name to it. It's that same idea. If you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, he says then in verse 2, you are snared by the words of your own mouth. It seems odd in verse 1 that someone would go to bat or extend their credit, their reputation, and even their personal finances for a stranger, right? That's what it says there. There's a couple different thoughts about why this might be laid out this way. We might understand why you would do it for a friend, but wisdom is still warning even against that. It's saying, you really don't want to go there. But whether it's for a friend or for a stranger, either way, you're extending your reputation and your own financial security, and you're now putting it in the hands of someone else. Sometimes people will do this simply because, I think that in the purest of hearts, it's because we just want to help someone. Oh, they don't have the means to do this. I have the means, and so I will do this thing, okay? If you find yourself in that situation, maybe you've even responded and you have extended your name or credit or reputation in that fashion. You're typically doing it with the understanding that your friend or child or whoever it is, that they are going to pay, right? Yeah. Okay? What the wisdom is saying, hey, you know what? The moment that you do that, you are releasing control, and it's now entirely in the hands of your friend. Meaning that they're the one who's going to decide to repay. You really can't force them to repay. Hey, I co-signed on that loan for you. You need to repay. This is my credit that's at stake. This is my money that I put down. I wasn't planning on buying a car for you. I wasn't planning on buying your first home for you. I'm really not interested in having that home and having to make the payments on it. I assumed that you were going to make the payments for it. No one really extends or becomes surety for someone expecting to actually have to follow through with it. But this is where wisdom says, no, that's what you're signing up for. Your intention may be, or your expectation would be, that they follow through on their part of the deal and you're totally free. I'm just extending my reputation or my credit. I'm not really expecting to lose money in this transaction. But wisdom says, no, you're a fool to think that. Let's continue going on through here. It says, my son, if you become surety for your friend, if you've shaken hands and pledged for a stranger, and a couple ways to think about it, because who would do that for someone who you don't know? But sometimes there can be this tendency to want to help someone out in such a way. You don't know them very well, but you realize, I've got the opportunity to do something. They don't have that same opportunity. They don't have the means. I would like to be benevolent and help them in this way. It's a big heart wanting to be a big blessing, but whether it's for a stranger or whether it's for someone who's a close friend, you're still releasing control of a situation, and in so doing, you're letting your reputation go out there, you're letting your own financial security go out there, and it's no longer in your control. You don't determine whether that gets paid back until you're called out and saying, well, you need to pay it back because the person who you were surety for did not. And that's why he says in verse 2 that you are snared by the words of your own mouth. You're not ensnared by your friend. Your friend didn't get you in trouble because you co-signed for them. I'm just using that as an example. Surety is a little bit different than co-signing, but I think it's the closest thing that we really relate to, okay? But so you're not ensnared. You're not in trouble because you co-signed and the person you co-signed for failed to make the payment, and now you're stuck with a financial commitment. You're stuck paying for a house you never wanted. He says you were ensnared by your own words. It was your decision. That was what you made the commitment to. And so why would you be surprised when someone's now expecting you to follow through on the commitment that you made? See, there's a big difference between saying, yeah, I'll sign so that you can get that, and saying, I'll sign and commit to making sure that this financial transaction is completed in an upright manner, regardless of what it costs me, whether that's my finances or my reputation. Do you see what's happening here? That's why he says in verse 2 that you are ensnared. You've been snared by the words of your own mouth. It says you are taken by the words of your own mouth. Snared and taken are kind of hunting terms, okay? That you've been trapped. You've been taken, like caught. You've been captured like an animal in a cage. A hunter pursuing him. He'll kind of bring in that picture in verse 5 of the hunter pursuing the gazelle. But he says that it's not your friend who entrapped you. You entrapped yourself in this the moment that you made this commitment to do this thing, because you took your reputation, your security, you put it on the line, thinking that it was just a harmless thing. But wisdom says, no, think about really what the consequences are of going down this road. As he goes on, he says in verse 3, and again, the emphasis of verse 2 is that it was your decision, it was your doing. It wasn't your friend, it was you. That's what you had control over. You had control over your decision. You had control over signing on the line or making that vow or that promise of being the surety or the guarantee. But you don't have control over what your friend does. You can't control your friend. You can't force them to pay that back. You can't force them to make good on it. And so again, verse 3, so do this, my son. So he's saying, okay, now here's kind of like what you need to do. Like he doesn't just say avoid this. He says, but if you've already gone there, right? He says, then this is what you need to do in response. Keep in mind that wisdom, as we're studying it, is always preventative medicine. I know I kind of say that every week, and I want you guys to make sure that that's ingrained. So after we've finished our study in the Proverbs, after 3.5 years in the Proverbs, you hear every Sunday, it's preventative maintenance, it's preventative medicine, that it's the idea that wisdom is to keep you out of harm's way. Wisdom doesn't necessarily get you out of harm's way. Now, wisdom might help direct you how to get out of a situation, but as we're going through the Proverbs, there's not a lot of that's here. Most of it is if you follow this wisdom, if you take heed to this, you won't find yourself in that situation to begin with. And so when he says, my son, these are all of the lessons that every child should learn before they venture off into life as an adult. Simple, basic things that you'd want to understand. Remember when you got your first credit card? Yeah, you know what I mean? And maybe someone didn't really equip you and train you about a credit card. I mean, we all assume that you understand what credit is, right? But then some people get their first credit card and they treat it, they use it like it's free money. You know what I mean? Like, this is great, I can get anything that I want. Well, actually, you can't get anything more than you could have gotten before. All that you're doing here is you're getting it now, but you're expected to pay it off. You know what I mean? Like you're either going to pay it off by the end of the month so you don't pay interest on this thing, or you're going to pay a whole lot more for this thing than you would have paid if you just saved up, right? But so a lot of people, they get into, credit kind of problems because no one really equipped them that you have to live within your means. But the idea of extending that credit, the idea of saying, hey, here's my credit card, take it with you, is kind of like, oh, do you trust that person? It's kind of like trusting a friend with your Social Security number. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Do you trust a stranger with your Social Security number? No. I recently had a conversation a couple years ago. I was sharing with my boys. This is just a little piece of wisdom for you guys, because we all understand the value of your Social Security number and what happens when it falls into the wrong hands. Okay? Don't laugh. I'm being totally serious when I say this. The same thing is true of your Apple ID. I'm just telling you right now. I'm telling you right now. The moment someone gets access to your Apple ID and your password, you are done for. I'm not kidding, because your phone can now get cloned and they can track everything that you're doing. It's the wildest thing, right? And you think, but why would you ever give your Apple ID and your password to someone else? I mean, your spouse maybe, okay, you know what I mean? Same like with your Social Security. Hopefully your marriage is a safe place for you to share your Social Security number, right? But I mean, like with a friend or someone that you're dating, why would you date someone and you need to give them your Social Security number? It doesn't need to happen. You know what I mean? I'm already freaked out about, like, why would you be sharing your location with someone all the time nonstop? You know what I mean? It's one thing if it's your spouse, if it's your family members and so forth, but I'm just kind of private that way. Don't ever ask me to share my location with you. I don't want you to know where I'm at all the time. Why do you need to know? Get away. Sometimes you feel that way with people. It's like, wow. It's just interesting because there's a younger generation that loves to share their location with anyone and everyone. It's crazy. But coming back to surety, he tells them in verse 3, here's what you need to do. If you've already gotten yourself, if you've already made that commitment, here's what you need to do. Verse 3, he says, so do this, my son, and deliver yourself. So already wisdom, or the father says, son, you are in trouble, and you need to get out of this situation, right? He's not even talking about the fact that it's gone south. He's saying the fact that you've become surety has already made you vulnerable. So he says, this is what you need to do. He says, for you have come into the hand of your friend. You are completely at your friend's mercy. I believe the New Living Translation shares it that way. You are now at your friend's mercy. Your reputation is in your friend's hand. Your financial security is in your friend's hand. It's not in your hand anymore. You released it and gave it to someone else. So he goes on and he says in the second part of verse 3, he says, so go and humble yourself and plead with your friend. So first of all, you are at your friend's mercy, and if you're going to get out of this arrangement, you're going to have to do so with your friend. You're going to have to go to your friend and humble yourself, and humbling yourself in this context means coming and saying, hey, you know what? I know that I made this promise to be a guarantee for you, but I was wrong in doing so. I should never have made that decision. It's not that I don't trust you. It's just that it's not wise for me to entrust everything of my reputation and my financial security into the hands of anyone else. Because I'm responsible for my debts. I am responsible for my reputation. But I can't control that once it's in someone else's hands, once it's in their care. And so he says that you're going to have to humble yourself, kind of recognize I was wrong to have made that commitment, and now I'm in essence begging you. He says, go and plead with your friend. In verse 4, he says, give no sleep to your eyes nor slumber to your eyelids. He's saying, man, this is like of the utmost importance. You need to get out of that arrangement. Verse 5, he says, deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. He says, man, you are totally entrapped in this thing. Like this is like you have been caught. But again, coming back, what have you been caught by? Your commitment. It was your words that trapped you. Okay? Now, in the second part of this here at the end of it where he says, that you would be delivered, like you would deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. That's painting a very serious picture. That's kind of like you're being hunted, you're being caught, and you're about to become meal, like dinner for someone. Okay? But I want you to understand that the hunter and you being the prey, it's not that your friend is the hunter. It's not portraying that your friend is really an evil person who shouldn't have been trusted in the first place. There's nothing in this piece of wisdom that puts the responsibility on the friend. It puts all of the responsibility upon you for your commitments, that you entered into a commitment that you shouldn't have entered into. And I think that this is a fascinating principle. Okay? You'll want to make sure that you don't take this and run with it to extremes. But what we're seeing wisdom saying right here is that aside from there being great foolishness in taking yourself and putting what you have in the hands of someone else who doesn't, but he is identifying that there are some commitments that we need to figure out how to get out of. And we oftentimes don't think about that much in the biblical sense because there's such a strong emphasis on your yes being yes and your no being no, that if you've made a vow, that you follow through that vow regardless of what the consequences are. That strong vow, oftentimes in the Old Testament, is a vow that is made to God. That if you've made a promise to God, don't break that promise. Follow through at all costs. But here, wisdom is saying that there are some commitments that we have made that we need to recognize that was a bad decision. And then I need to do everything I can to try to reverse that. Now, I also think that it's important as I'm saying this, is that he's not just saying, hey, you know what, go out and break your word. He's not saying that. He's not saying, break a promise or break a vow. He's saying you need to do everything within your means to figure out how to get out of that. He's saying, so you need to go and humble yourself before the person who you made the commitment to, and you will be at their mercy, but you need to do everything within your means to let them release you from that commitment because it's a commitment you should have never entered into in the first place. There are some promises that we make that should not be kept, but how you get out of that is a matter of integrity. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of unfolding here. And so again, it's not saying, oh, you've got a bad friend and they're trying to take advantage of you. But I mean, if you really just think about the situation from a practical scenario, they're coming to you because you've got credit and they don't. They're coming to you because you've got financial resources and they don't, okay? And while we may have a heart and want to help people who are just kind of getting started in life, okay? If they're just getting started in life, they do not have experience. So in this situation, your guarantee or surety that involves your name and your financial security is now in the hands of someone who we've just identified does not have experience, okay? The other thing is maybe they're not just getting started in life, maybe they just had a bad string of luck. Do you think their luck just changed because you decided to extend your credit to them? Does that change things? Not likely. And so on a very practical level, there is an element of saying, you know what? I would like to help you. And in no way is this proverb like a law that says never, ever, ever do this thing. The Proverbs are wisdom saying, man, be careful because this is an easy trap to fall into, and fools do it all the time, and wisdom says be careful about going here, okay? But there are times that we do want to equip people. We want to give them an opportunity. And I think a really great guiding principle, whether you're extending credit as surety, whether you are lending something, and this really isn't about a loan, like if you lending money to someone, that's a different transaction here, okay? But it's always good, what you are extending or what you are lending is your name, your reputation, and the financial consequences that could result, right? So a good guiding principle is to never lend something that you're not willing to lose. Okay? And so if it's your reputation, you need to ask yourself, is this something I'm willing to lose my reputation over? Is this something I'm willing to lose my credit over to this extent? How much am I extending to them? If I'm extending them $500, is that something that I can afford to lose? Maybe so. If it's $5,000, I don't know that really I'll make it through the month if I lose that. Is it $50,000? Is it the commitment for a house that costs $500,000? You know what I mean? Like you just ask yourself the simple question, is this something I can afford to lose if this thing goes south? And again, keep in mind that it's not that you have a malicious and evil and manipulative friend. It's that your friend cannot control all of the circumstances. They may have a great plan and they present it to you. Listen, I only need you to do this for me until next week, because next week I've got these resources coming in. I mean, imagine that they've got their crop. It just has to be harvested and taken to market. Sounds like a good deal. But what if a storm comes in 2 days before the harvest and wipes the crop out? What happens if the storm doesn't come in, but the price of the market drops? What happens if it does come in, the market stays the same, you get it to market, you get paid, but on the way back you encounter thieves? All of these things are things out of their control, but it's certainly out of your control that much more. And so he's saying, be careful, deliver yourself from this situation, because you're definitely not in control of the outcome of it, and even the person who is responsible, they don't have control over the outcome of it either. Proverbs 11:15 says, he who is surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure. Meaning that if I don't put myself in that vulnerable situation, I really don't have to worry about the outcome of someone else's mishandling of my reputation or of my financial commitments. We move on into the next section, verses 6 through 11. And verses 6 through 11 deals with the topic, I think just a single word would be laziness, okay? And so it says in verse 6, it says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Now that right there is just a great line. There's something kind of cool about it, isn't there? I mean, doesn't it seem like that would be like a great t-shirt to have, a bumper sticker, go to the ant, you sluggard. And people would read it and be like, what in the world does that mean? And unless you know what this verse is and what the context is, you'd be like, I don't know what that means, but it still seems like a cool little catchphrase. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which, having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When you rise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. So starting in verse 6, go to the ant, you sluggard. Sluggard is not a word that we typically use too much, right? I mean, when you hear that, you might think that the root word is slug, meaning to actually hit someone in the face, right? Sluggard, It's not that. It means to be sluggish. And we all, oh, yes, we do use that word. Yeah, I'm feeling a little sluggish today. What does that mean? If you're feeling a little bit sluggish, you're feeling a little bit slow. And that's exactly what the Hebrew word means. It means to be slow, not in like oh, you're a little slow upstairs. It's not that, okay? It's that you're moving very slow. It actually also gets translated as being idle. The majority of the times that sluggard is used in the Old Testament, majority of the time it just simply gets translated as the lazy person, okay? So they're slow to get anything done. They're slow to get anything accomplished. They are idle. And so to the lazy individual, wisdom says, go to the ant and learn a lesson. Just watch the ant and learn a few things from this tiny little critter, okay? Now, Solomon was a man, in all of his wisdom, he loved to study creation. He was kind of like this scientific observer, but it wasn't that he was looking to make scientific discoveries. He just kind of had this perspective that as I watch God's handiwork, creation, I can learn a lot of things. And so he wrote volumes about creation, about animals, about birds, about fish. Like he just loved, in his wisdom, watching and recording things. And so from that, here he is bringing in an illustration of, man, you know what? The lazy guy can learn a lot from just watching an ant do what an ant does. So he says, go to the ant and learn a lesson. He says, consider her ways and be what? Wise. So there's already the implication that the lazy person lacks wisdom. Okay, they don't have wisdom. If they're lazy, they're lacking wisdom. All right? And he says, but you could learn some wisdom. You could gain some wisdom by just watching an ant do what an ant does. Consider her ways and be wise. Verse 7 concerning the ant, it says, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. And so he's saying that, the ant isn't like forced or told what to do. I know like you read this, you kind of go, oh, this is one of those verses, like they don't realize there's like a queen ant, there's this whole colony and this hierarchy and all these stuff. That's not at all what Solomon is getting at, okay? What Solomon's getting at is if you watch ants, they don't have taskmasters over them, The ants all work. They all walk in their line. They're all carrying their foods. They're bringing it to the storehouse. They're doing their labors. But it's not like they're walking in a line and then you've got bigger ants off on the side with whips. You know what I mean? You don't see little ants with megaphones. Continue on, continue. Hey, get to work. You know what I mean? Like all of the ants are working, and they're all just like doing what they're designed to do, right? They work and they work and they work. And they're diligent in their work. And what's also being communicated here as an observation by Solomon is that there's a lot of planning that goes into what they're doing. They recognize that there are only certain opportunities whereby they can do the work they need to do so that they can have their stores so that when winter comes, they're not still trying to gather. He's identifying that there are rainy days that come, but you need to plan ahead, okay? So again, they have no captain. They have no one lecturing them, no one keeping them. Have you raised teenagers? Raise your hand if you've raised teenagers. No? Okay, so some of you have, and some of you are on your way to that joyous occasion, okay? Understand, if you haven't gotten there yet, please spend lots of time in the Proverbs. I'm not joking. The Proverbs are a great friend to parents of teenagers. And in fact, Proverbs should be, as your kids are moving into even the preteen years, have them read through the Proverbs regularly and discuss them with them. Have them teach you, what are you learning in the Proverbs today? Because if your child can learn wisdom from those who have it to give, then your child will excel. And when wisdom escapes them altogether, and you're having to have that parental moment that happens, about every 5 minutes throughout their existence, then you're able to bring them back to truths that they've heard before, that they've chewed on before, that they've discovered before, and you go, oh, remember the ant? Oh, yeah, the ant. That's right. And they're able to glean these things, right? But so, when we come to this topic of laboring, the idea is that laziness is not going to care for you. We have a lot of issues in our society today, right? And sometimes we go back and we go, oh, it's the parents. I mean, really, ever since Gene Wilder said it in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, it's the mother and the father. Parenting has a lot to do with the direction of society, of where it goes. But a lot of times we don't do our kids a service in making life easy. We don't equip them with the wisdom that Solomon here is saying, listen, every child needs to know these essential truths before they venture off into adulthood. They need to understand the problems of extending credit beyond your own sphere, beyond your own control. You also need to have a good work ethic. And that's something that's kind of hard to instill in kids today, especially with technology. Technology is not labor. I mean, you can get a career working in technology for sure. But I mean, it's not like you're gaining a great skill set in learning how to complete a level. You know what I mean? Oh, no, yeah, my kids have told me plenty of times all of the great things that they're learning as they're playing a video game. I'm like, I'd rather just have you go pull weeds. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather have you go work in the yard. I'd rather have you do something productive, Oh, Dad, you don't get it. Not, well, you're going to get it. And so... But so there's this lesson here that's to be learned from the ant, and the first one is that they have no overseer. There's no one having to harp on them continually, telling them what to do. One of the great things you can instill within your children is for them to discover how to be self-starters, for them to identify what a need is, and then to take the initiative to respond to that need and do it. If by chance you homeschool your kids, you've got a phenomenal opportunity. Homeschooling, when done right, can create self-starters. By the time your kids, like in 4th grade, 5th grade, you should be getting to an area where they can be doing more of their subjects on their own. Certainly by the time they're in 6th grade, certainly 7th grade, they should be able to do a lot of their homeschooling on their own. You're just setting the resources before them. You're telling them these are the assignments you're going to do today, but I don't have to spoon feed you all of these things. You're responsible. You get to decide when your summer break begins. You can either have summer break begin early May, or it can begin late July. But either way, the fall begins mid-August. So you can have a couple months vacation or a couple weeks. It's up to you depending on how diligent you are. And if I'm speaking to you on this and you're in this season of life, watch your kids work too, okay? Just kind of make sure they're really doing it and making sure that they're doing a good job of it, because you're not instilling a good self-starter work ethic if you're only training them how to maneuver the system and be irresponsible by cheating or by, falsifying documents and so forth. I don't think those are the skills for life that you're probably looking to equip your kids with. But so the work ethic, you go and you watch, they have no one overseeing them, they just know this is what needs to be done, and I do it. It goes on, it says that she provides, in verse 8, her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. And there's an important lesson here, that there are windows of opportunity to labor. And there are windows of opportunity where you can't. When my boys kind of came to that season whereby they realized there was something they wanted to save up for, something that they wanted to purchase with their own money, and they would come and they'd say, Dad, are there any jobs around the house I can do to get paid? Okay? And this is a really rare thing in the Smith family. To find a job around the house to get paid for is a rare find. Because in my perspective, this is our family. This is our home. You always use ours whenever it's a matter of like working around here, and you use mine as a parent when it's a matter of rules that you want to have maintained. This is my house and this is how we do it. This is our house, there's weeds. Those are our weeds, go pull them, okay? And so you kind of have to know how to maneuver through this parenting thing, right? But so for the most part, be like, you know what? We've got responsibilities. We operate as a family here. And so I don't think I need to pay you to do something that I myself am going to do for free. This is our responsibility, so let's do this thing. But there is, on the flip side of that, something that is great in accomplishing and teaching your kids how to work and how to earn a wage. They start off and they're like saying, hey, Dad, here's minimum wage. I'd like minimum wage for pulling weeds. And you remind them very quickly, you have no work experience. There's no minimum wage for you here. You know what I mean? Like, I'll pay you $5 to pull that yard's worth of weeds. I go, and when you start to get some stamina, some skills, and some speed up, then we can talk about an hourly wage. But I am not paying you by the hour initially, because you'll quickly learn this lesson of economics that if I go really slow, I make more money. And that's not how it works, okay? And so giving them these opportunities to work. But so they would come up and they would say, hey, is there anything that I can do for money? And I would say, well, okay, as an example, sure, there's weeds that need to be pulled. And some of them would be like, is there anything else I can do? I'm like, no, there's nothing else you can do. There's nothing else that I need to have done. Well, could I do this? I don't need that to be done. Why would I pay you to do something that I don't need to have done? No, if you want to work, here's what the job is, okay? But check this out. The weeds need to be pulled by June. Okay? And if you're going to come to me in the middle of June, it's too late, man. Those weeds are already pulled. And so one of the lessons, and this is what the ant teaches us, is there is a time to work, but there are also times where the opportunity to work have passed by. There are rainy days where the ant is not out there gathering for its stores. It is inside enjoying the stores that it gathered while it had the opportunity. There are opportunities to labor. There are opportunities to earn a wage. There are opportunities to plan ahead so that when the rainy day comes, you're provided for. These are the lessons that we learn from the ant as we look at the ant. When he goes on in verse 9, he says, how long will you slumber, O sluggard, or O lazy man? When will you rise up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. Again, how long will you slumber? That's another classic statement. It gets rephrased, modern language, but every mom of any teenager has said it plenty of times. When are you going to get up? Part of training your kid. There's a time to wake up. There's a time to go to sleep. But here, wisdom is saying, if you're going to continue to be lazy, if you're going to be unproductive, there's going to be consequences to this. He says in verse 11, the consequences, so shall your poverty come on you like a prowler and your need like an armed man. This reference to poverty is saying that it's inevitable, that you can't just not work forever and continue to succeed or continue to even live unless someone else is providing for you. And that is one of the difficulties in our day. It's not unique to our day. It just seems to be a bit more rampant in our day than it was in prior generations. Part of it is because every parent provides for their kids because there's a season where kids can't provide for themselves, right? There's a time where food has to be prepared for them, food has to be provided for them, but the goal of parenting is to always have your kids be independent of you and going on and making their own way in the world, providing for themselves and providing for their future families. But they have to be equipped with that. They have to be prepared to do that, and that begins at a fairly young age of teaching them how to labor as opposed to just how to sleep in. And so he throws this out there that your poverty will come upon you like a prowler. This ties into the idea that there's an opportunity to work. There's an opportunity to provide, but that opportunity will close. You can't wait until you need money to go out and get a job, right? Typically, in most situations, you need money to get a job. What I mean by that is you've got to have, in most situations, when someone's just starting out, you've got to have a means of transportation to get to your job. Unless you can walk there, you're going to need some way of getting there. So either you're going to pay for the bus or you're going to have to buy your own car. But it's always hard. Like, you always need that money to get started in the thing. But even if you were blessed with a vehicle, you still need money to put gas in it. You still have to pay for the insurance. You still have to pay for the maintenance. You've got to put tires on that thing. For all of the parents, if you're paying for all those things for your kid, be strategic and understand that you're not helping them by giving them all of these things. You will help them by helping them discover. You might ease them into those responsibilities. You might help them get started, but let them take on the responsibility. Our boys from the very get-go always have paid their own cell phone bill. They should always. Why would I pay for their cell phone bill? You know what I mean? Like, it's your phone, you pay for it, you know? When it came to paying for their auto insurance, we started off, but this is just our own family's practices, right? But we started off by saying, we'll pay for half of your auto insurance, okay? But not always. This is just going to be until you get to a place where you can pay for all of it. We're just trying to wean you off of us. But if you don't do that and they go off and they get married, then either A, they're going to have a huge shock when as newlyweds, they've got to pay for their own cell phones, their own auto insurance, their own gas, all of these things. It's going to be this massive shock because they're not prepared for it, or you're going to be paying for it, okay? And this is not an uncommon practice in our day. It is not uncommon for young adults who are married, living on their own, to have their parents still paying for some of these expenses. But those parents are not equipping them, okay? And so you need to understand that there's a season, there's an opportunity to work. Don't turn work down. There's a time where you have the opportunity. There aren't always weeds to be pulled. Only in the springtime, son. And so if you're looking for some money for the fall, because there's something special that happens in the fall, then you're going to have to plan ahead and pull weeds in the spring, so you have those resources in the fall when you want to spend them. You can't wait till the fall when you need the money to go out and try to figure out those resources, or else your poverty will come upon you like a prowler and your need like an armed man. Came out of nowhere, totally surprised. In college, that's kind of how taxes were for me. Taxers were like an armed man that came out of nowhere. I owe money? How in the world can this be? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to figure out how to get by. I mean, pay the government. Are you kidding me? Why should I have to pay the government? I don't have money to pay the government taxes, but death and taxes, man, it's just the reality, right? And then you kind of learn the lesson, it would be better to plan ahead so that I'm not in this financial crisis every springtime. Taxes will be due. And so I might as well plan ahead so that I don't have to get stressed out because it's come upon me like an armed man. This idea of working and laboring, it has escaped many people throughout much of history. It's not something new. We might see an epidemic portion of it happening in our day and our age, but it's nothing new at all. When Paul was writing to the early believers in Thessalonica, For whatever reason, there was a mentality amongst the early church there in Thessalonica that some people would work and some people didn't have to work. So he writes to them in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. He says, "For even when we were with you, we commanded you this." He says, "This is what I told you when I was with you guys." He says, "If anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. Now, those who are such, we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ that they work in quietness and eat their own bread, as opposed to someone else's bread." But there was this idea, kind of like, well, you have bread, I don't have bread, you should feed me. You should be providing for me, all right? And Paul is addressing this issue in the church 2,000 years ago, saying that is so wrong. It's not their responsibility. Are we supposed to care? Are we supposed to bear one another's burdens? Absolutely. But there's a difference between helping someone in need and empowering someone who's lazy. And so he's addressing that very issue. He's saying, man, you need to get a job and you need to provide for yourself. It is not the church's responsibility to be your entitlement program. But modern conveniences have brought us to a point where a lot of people have that entitlement perspective and even that inability to plan ahead because things are just so convenient. You know, in ancient times, when it came to meal prep was kind of like an all-day thing. If you were going to make bread, which is kind of like the common staple, that grain had to be milled, then the flour was used, and then it was baked. In really primitive situations, it was baked over a hot stone that was sitting on the coals of a fire that had previously been made for that purpose. Or in more convenient times later on, it was baked in a wood-fired oven, which again was prepared with wood and fire. There was a lot of preparation that went into just simply making bread. If you were going to put meat on the table for that night, that meat had to be slaughtered, it had to be dressed, then it had to be cooked, as opposed to today we might just defrost it, right? But I mean, you don't have to plan anything for your dinner if you don't want to today. You can just go and look in the freezer, pop it in the microwave, and you're done. You didn't plan it, you didn't think about it, you just looked and said, here it is, do. And so in an age of convenience, we have also lost a lot of the wisdom that prior ages possessed simply out of necessity and realizing you can't wait until you're hungry to figure out what you're going to eat. You've got to start planning that meal the moment that you're done finishing breakfast, you're going to start working for lunch. You've got to plan out your bread for the week. You've got to figure out what meat you're going to put on the table, when and how, because it's going to be a process. And so there is already in day-to-day life, there is this ingrained realization that I must be planning ahead. I just can't be spontaneous and grab something from the freezer or head for a drive-thru. Now, I'm not harping on modern conveniences. I'm saying, though, with that, we have lost a great deal of wisdom because there were lessons that were just glaringly in your face throughout most of history that says you just can't wait until your tummy growls to figure out what you're going to eat. And so Paul sets this out before them. Prior to that, Solomon is giving this to us. In Proverbs 19:15, it says, laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. Proverbs 20, verse 13, do not love sleep, lest you come to poverty. He says, open your eyes and you will be satisfied with bread. He says, you've got to have eyes to see that you need to be laboring, that you need to be preparing, that you need to be planning. Now, this is wisdom speaking. It's just life lessons everyone should learn, but not everyone does learn. As a parent or as one who is mentoring another individual, be they younger than you or be they older than you, wisdom is still wisdom, and when it originates from God, we have all freedom to set it before someone and explain it to them and say, you know what, this is what the Word of God has to say. If you don't work, you don't eat. And so there are flip sides to a lot of the principles that we see in the Proverbs, meaning that there's other scriptures that might seem to almost contradict, but they really don't. I mean, God doesn't ever contradict himself. But when we look at this laboring, planning, forethought, preparing, storing up, because there are seasons where provision isn't available, it might seem that it almost flies in the face of, say, what Jesus says about living by faith. And if we look in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 23, Jesus says this. He says, therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life of what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body what you will put on. He says, is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? He says, look at the birds of the air. He pulls a Solomon, right? So Solomon said, look to the ant. Jesus says, look to the birds. But it seems like he's saying something different. Seems. He says, for of the birds, he says, they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For after these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. There's a lot of similarities between what Solomon is saying and what Jesus is saying, but even in these similarities, they almost seem to clash, to butt heads. But I think an important thing to do is to really identify what is the message of each. See, Solomon is giving a message. He's saying, hey, listen, here's the deal. You need to labor. You need to not be what? Lazy. Solomon is addressing the issue of laziness. Jesus, when you read through that passage closely, you will realize that while he is talking about provision, while he's talking about no need to store up, the birds don't do it, why would you do it? And it almost seems contrary, but if you look at what Jesus' point is, he really has 2 points in his passage, but the first one is do not worry. He's dealing with the worry facet. He's not talking about being lazy, and he's not talking about learning to labor. He's talking about you need to not be worrying. So Solomon is warning against laziness, and Jesus at the other end of the extreme, the other end of the spectrum, is talking about being anxious about where your provision is going to come from. Jesus isn't talking about being lazy, but he is saying that in your anxiety-stricken state, you need to learn to trust your heavenly Father because he knows how to care for you. Jesus also, if you were to read just before where we started reading, he's also addressing materialism in an idolatrous sense. Just the verses right before where we started reading is where Jesus says, you cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot serve God and mammon both. He's saying you can't pursue material wealth and still be faithful to God, meaning you're putting all of your hope and your trust in what you're accomplishing in this lifetime. And that's why he says, no, you need to seek first the kingdom of heaven. You need to seek first his righteousness and let God add these things to you. There are times where Jesus, as he called his disciples and will even call us at times, to step out in faith and trust him implicitly. There are times that we might be doing everything we can to provide, to not be lazy, but we're still finding that we're not making ends meet. And oftentimes those are seasons where the Lord is saying, you need to trust me. He's not saying you need to give up your attempts. He's not saying you need to give in to laziness. He's saying you need to trust me because even your best can't accomplish this, but your Father knows what you need. And so trust me. And so that call to live by faith is in no way contrary to the exhortation to not be lazy. Laziness and faithfulness are not the same thing. And you'll know that they're not the same thing because laziness ultimately says, I don't care. And faithfulness says, I care a great deal, but I am trusting the Lord with all of these cares. Laziness is just kind of like, I'll just stay in bed. Faithfulness says, Lord, I'm going to do everything that I can to please you, to honor you, and to do what you have called me to do. But I recognize that I need to trust you from the beginning of this to the end of this. When you're learning the lessons of walking by faith, you'll oftentimes encounter the situation whereby you realize God is calling me to trust him, and I'm having a hard time doing so. I know he wants me to trust him. I know he wants me to walk by faith in this, but it scares the dickens out of me to not be doing something to solve the problem. Laziness says, I don't care. I'm not concerned about a thing. Faithfulness is not a matter of not caring. Faithfulness is caring and trusting God to do what you cannot. Laziness is just not caring and trusting that someone else is going to do what I should be doing for myself. So as we come back to our passage here, we come into the last two sections, starting in verse 12 through verse 15, a lot of these sections have titles in it that are inserted there, and there's not one inserted after verses 15 there, but there is a paragraph break there, and I think they're worth separating. But so we'll just look at verses 12 through 15, and it talks about the wicked or the worthless person. It says, a worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. Therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. So this worthless or this wicked individual is just giving a description of really what's at the root, what's in their heart. And as he goes through this, he gives some outward descriptions of what the wicked or worthless person is like, what they do, and their appearances and actions. It doesn't mean that anytime you see someone doing one of these things, oh, that wicked person. There are people who have thought that, right? But it starts off and it says that the worthless person or the wicked man walks with a perverse mouth. And that word perverse is going to appear here multiple times. The word perverse simply means to be twisted out of shape or form. Okay? So if you think about an aluminum can or an empty plastic water bottle, okay, you finish drinking it, you're bored, you do something with it, right? I mean, like you might stomp on it, you might kind of push it, you might crank it up, you might see how small you can make the thing, but when you see either that empty water bottle or that can that has been disfigured, you know that that's not the way that it was made, and you know it wasn't made or created for that purpose right there, right? That it is out of shape, it's out of form, it has been twisted out of shape or form. Okay? If you asked a friend, hey, they're coming over for dinner, it's Thanksgiving, what can I bring? You say, you know what, I would love it if you could make some breadsticks. Breadsticks would be fantastic. But they show up with pretzels? You're kind of like, what? No, I asked for breadsticks. Well, they're the same thing. Yeah, but they're all twisted, man. I need these things to be straight. That pretzel's not going to fit on the plate where I wanted it to go, right? The idea of perverse is that it's been twisted. There's nothing perverse about pretzels. I like pretzels. Okay? I'm just trying to illustrate a little bit here. It's twisted out of shape. We oftentimes use perverse in the sexual connotation because that's the most common use of it, especially in our vocabulary. And that just simply means that something that God intended and created one way, others have come along and they've twisted it out of its shape and out of its proper form. They're not using it the way that it's intended to be used. It no longer looks the way that it used to look. It's not functioning the way that it used to function. Okay? And so that perversion is what was originally intended one way, but now it's been created into something entirely different. And so he says that this wicked or worthless person, they have a perverse mouth, that their mouth is speaking forth twisted things. Okay? He goes on, he says that he winks with his eyes. Winking we use in a variety of ways, right? Sometimes someone winks and you think, that person's flirting at me. Other people wink and they're just saying hello, right? They're just saying hi. But then there's the wink that you kind of spot, where it's kind of like that's the sign. Like that's the communication. Okay, this is the time. Execute the plan. That's what's at work here. So he winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. It's kind of that. He goes on. It says that perversity, verse 14, is in his heart. And really, it's what's in the heart of an individual that manifests everything that comes out of that heart, whether it's the perversity of the heart that provides the perversity of the words or the perversity of the actions, whatever it is, from out of the heart the mouth speaks. But he says perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. The worthless, wicked individual, it's what they do, it's what they are. Don't ever be surprised that the wicked person is wicked. But then in verse 14 it says that he sows discord. That is, that he brings about division. And that's going to be, we're going to see that again just at the end of our time here today. But in verse 15 he says, therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. Meaning that this manner of living is not sustainable. Okay? That they are found out, that they are undone, that his calamity comes upon him suddenly. As we move into verses 16 through 19, our last section for today, it begins with this line in verse 16 where it says, these 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him. And we're going to see this phrase and this literary structure used a handful of other times in our study in the Proverbs, okay? And sometimes when you read this, you kind of read it initially like, what in the world exactly is he saying? These 6 things and a 7th things. And we're going to see he's going to actually provide us with a list of 7 things. But this phrase, academics refer to this as, is it? Number parallelism is what they call this, okay? And so it has to do with the numbers in the sequence that's being used. Perhaps overly simplified way of looking at this is that there's 6 things that are going to be listed here that God really hates. And God does hate things, okay? Don't ever think that because God is love, he doesn't hate. He does hate, okay? But his hatred is a righteous hatred. Okay? And so the very first idea, that the recognition that God hates something, is an indication that, first of all, if God is seeking to conform you and make you more and more into the likeness of Jesus Christ, then there is a righteous hatred, and it's not wrong for you as a believer to possess that righteous hatred. Don't take your hatred and spiritualize it saying that it's righteous. But just recognize that as you're being made more and more like Jesus Christ, don't be surprised that you hate the things that God hates and that you love the things that God loves. That's part of his process of making you more and more like him. But so he says here that there's these 6 things that God hates, but then he says that the 7 things are an abomination. And the way that this is typically understood is that these 6 things that he's going to list off, God hates. But the 7th thing on the list is like what he hates more of all of them. Like this is it. Like this is the abomination. It's one thing for God to hate something. It's another thing for something to be an abomination. That is like the worst of the worst of the worst. You couldn't get God any more upset than by presenting before him an abomination. So let's take a look at it. He says the first one, verse 17, is a proud look. God hates that. He hates a proud look. Why? Because a proud look inevitably proceeds from a proud heart, okay? He goes on, and he says, a lying tongue. Well, why does God hate lying? Oh, it's not true. Yeah, that's right. He hates lying because God is truth, and he hates a lie because it's completely counter to who and what and how he is. So he hates deceit. He hates lying. It goes on, and it says, hands that shed innocent blood. He's not talking about shedding blood in the general sense. He's talking about injustice. He's talking about when an innocent life has been shed blood. He's not talking about, the death sentence. That's spelled out in Scripture. God has no problem with that so long as it is justly carried out and not of the innocent, and that's what he's getting at here. He says, hands that shed innocent blood. He says in verse 18, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running, like pursuing evil. He says in verse 19, a false witness who speaks lies. And then the last, this would be the 7th, and one who sows discord among the brethren. So if we're looking at this the way that it's typically understood, those first 6 things are things that God hates. And again, if God hates those things, then we would do well to hate them as well. Particularly hate them in ourselves. That if God hates these things, these are not practices that we should be embracing. These are not things that if we find ourselves even moving in the direction of that proud look, the lying tongue, the shedding of innocent blood, the devising of wicked plans, being quick to run toward evil, or speaking falsely, we should recognize, man, God hates that, and that's the last thing that I want to be associated with. Okay? But then the 7th one, kind of the granddaddy of them all, is one who sows discord, or division, among brethren. Now, in this context, the brethren there is, it encompasses either the immediate family, the local community, or the whole nation in the context of Israel. Okay? So it's not just like limited to one thing. For us, when we hear brethren, we typically would think of what? The church. We would think about our brothers and sisters in Christ. But what we want to glean from this, of all of the things that God hates that are listed here, at the top of the list is he absolutely hates when individuals come in and they sow seeds of discord, when they begin to bring division in the midst of that which God has done what? He's united. Think about when Jesus is asked and questioned about divorce. He says, let no man separate what God has joined together. When God has united something, he hates it when someone or something else comes in and wants to break that union apart. That's why in Malachi, the last prophet of the Old Testament, it says that God hates divorce. He hates divorce. Why? Because God has joined a man and a woman together in marriage, but then that has been separated. Now, it might have been separated. The divorce might be a biblical divorce, which is only because of sexual failure or immorality on the part of one individual in the marriage, right? But God still hates it. He still hates the fact that someone's sin came in and destroyed what he made to be beautiful. That he joined something together, and then either a person came in and they brought about that division, or sin came in and brought about that division. But God hates division when it's something that he has joined together. If it's not what he's joined together, it might do well to be divided. Okay? But when we think about the body of Christ, we think about like, wow, this is what God has joined together, and God just absolutely, it's an abomination. And when someone goes in and they begin to sow the seeds of discord. And some people believe that even those first 6 things are all things that might play in to the attempt to bring division. Sadly, a lot of Christians have gone through the unfortunate situation of going through a church split. And if it's been in a church where you were involved, or if it was a small church where you feel the ripples and the impact of it, then you understand the pain, but also the confusion that oftentimes accompanies that, because you're like, why is this happening? Why are people like set on this division? What's happening here? And you're not sure, like there's this division, there's 2 sides, and I'm kind of caught in the middle. I love people on both sides. Even in leadership seems to be divided over this issue, and there's just a lot of confusion. It's almost like when a mother and a father divorce, and their young children are trying to understand the why of it. Like they're just confused, and sometimes the child thinks, it must be my fault, I must have done something wrong, and it's like, no, honey, it wasn't your fault. Your parents' divorce is the result of your parents' decisions. It's the result of their own sin at some degree, at some level. And oftentimes, a church split is the same thing. It's someone's sin. My own personal opinion is that it's a very rare thing that a church splits over doctrinal issues. They'll always try to make it sound like doctrinal issues, because we're told in the New Testament, we're exhorted to separate ourselves from false prophets, false teachers, false apostles. We're to be on guard against false doctrines. We're not to be united with that which is false. And so there's a sense of justification of a church split if it's over a doctrinal, if it's over truth. But usually, if you're involved at a deep enough level and you understand the dynamics of a church split, it's usually about someone's flesh. It's usually about someone's personal ambition. There's usually sin at work at one level or another. And it could be that there's someone who's lower in the ranks of staff who wants that senior position. It could be that it's just a matter that we don't appreciate or agree with the direction that our pastor or the elder board is going. And so we're going to venture and break off and do our own thing. And you have the sheep that are just kind of scattering. When Leah and I first came up here in 1999 and we're starting Calvary Chapel, Fraser Park, we opened up our doors. We didn't really know anyone in the community because we had just moved up here. We just knew the Lord was calling us to this ministry. And as people showed up initially and we began to get to know them, we realized that of the first 32 people who showed up in the first month of this church plant, that a lot of them knew each other. And of course you think, well, yeah, you live on the mountain, you kind of know everyone. But they knew everyone from going to church with them at other churches prior to church splits. Within the first year, one brother who had stuck around kind of took me on a tour of the church family tree. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, there's this church, but that was the result of this split. And when that split happened back here at this church, these 2 churches resulted. And then that church was really a part of another church split previously over here. And it was kind of going through this whole thing. And I was so grieved. I was thinking, man, how sad. There's such this history of division within the church on this mountain. And then as he shared, and as we had heard from many others who we got to know, who were great brothers and sisters in the Lord who lived up here, but we discovered that there were certain people who said, we're never going to go to church on the mountain again. And because of that history of division within the brethren, they decided, you know what, we're just going to go off the hill to go to church. And some have stayed and continue to go off the hill to go to church because of the discord, because of the division that has taken place. I want you to know God absolutely hates it. It's an abomination in his sight. He can't stand it. And that's one reason why we need to be so cautious as we try to figure out how do we navigate through certain differences that may come up within the body of Christ. For one, we should be very gracious, but we should also be honest enough to identify when doctrine is the issue and when doctrine isn't the issue. And when it's just simply a matter that there's selfish ambition. And you can't control someone else's selfish ambition. You can confront it, but you can't control it. And so sadly, division happens. But we just want to make sure that we're not the cause of it. We might be the victims of it, but we certainly don't want to be the cause of it, because that's an abomination in the sight of the Lord.